Hello, everyone. Today's session is about building an exceptional consumer brand in the age of sustainability. And who better to talk about this than famous designer and founder of Stella McCartney House, Stella McCartney herself. And she will be in conversation with Sophie Bakalar, partner at Collab Fund, to talk about all those aspects of sustainability, environmental friendly materials, and cruelty-free materials as well, all topics that are very dear to Stella's heart. So without further ado, I'll leave the stage to our great speakers, Sophie Bakalar and Stella McCartney. Take it away.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. As Ben mentioned, I'm here representing Collab Fund. We're a 15-year-old venture fund based in New York City, and we invest at the intersection of for-profit and for-good, which covers everything from consumer goods like Olipop and Farmer's Dog to fintech companies like Upstart and health tech companies like Whoop. We've also been very active climate investors, and we launched a dedicated fund in 2022, which is called SOS, to which Stella is a close collaborator and partner. I'm thrilled to have Stella joining us in this conversation this morning. Obviously, she's a true visionary in the fashion industry and a real pioneer in sustainability, and particularly in sustainable fashion. So many of the topics that have become mainstream today are ones that she's been talking about for decades now, long before they were cool. So I'm very excited to dig in, and today we'll talk through her journey and how she's built a generation-defining consumer brand that is both sustainable but also design forward. So maybe to start, Stella, we could talk about just how you got started. What inspired you to start Stella McCartney? What was it that really got you interested in sustainable materials and fashion?
Well, thank you for having me, guys. And hello to everyone who's joining me today. I'm here in London in my headquarters. And I guess in answer to your question, I was inspired to start a fashion house because I love fashion. I trained to be a fashion designer. And at a very, very early age, I knew that was my purpose and passion. And so I basically was fortunate enough. I went to one of the greatest fashion schools and studied here in London called Central St. Martin's. And when I left, I was offered an amazing position to head a house in Paris. And then I always knew I wanted to come back and come back to my own brand. And so I did that in 2001, and I founded the Stella McCartney brand here in London. We're based out of the city, but I'm in partnership with the LVMH group. So I think, what happened for me, I was inspired because I just wanted to be a fashion designer. I found there were very few female founded fashion houses and female designed fashion houses. And I just wanted to wear fashion that I couldn't really find. So that was kind of the basic starting point. It was my definite purpose and passion. And also I found that I wasn't able to really get what I wanted. And I was very focused on designing clothes for women that women could wear and that weren't, at the time, and even today, you can see so many things on the runways in Fashion Week are very unwearable, and they're more for press and for, editorial and shock value to kind of sell a handbag at the end of the day. And I think for me, I was like, I really want to wear clothes. I want to wear great men's suits. So I studied at Savile Row. And I also want to make accessories that are not killing animals. I was brought up a vegetarian on one of the first Soil Association organic farms here in England, to quite a game-changing family and, very creative and people that just push boundaries. So when I went to Paris, I was like, look, I'm not going to make leather handbags for you to sell and make your profits, or leather shoes. They're going to all be vegan and plant-based. So I still got the job, and actually I made the business go about 600-fold in a couple of years. So I found early on that my ethics were a big part of how I wanted to found a fashion house, and I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I, grew up a vegetarian, and I didn't really understand why we had to kill animals for fashion. And so that's been the real kind of base of my brand ever since. And now it's gone masses of steps further, because obviously within that time frame, there was a great report written called Livestock's Long Shadow for the UN. And I read that in the 90s or early 2000s. And it made the first ever connection between sustainability and animal agriculture. So that's really, really inspired now where we are as a brand that goes beyond just not being part of the billions of animals that are killed in the name of fashion every year. We're now looking obviously at we don't use any PVCs, we don't use animal glues, we look at innovation and we're probably the pioneers in the industry looking, even my last show, which was 96% sustainable just a month ago in Paris, I had knitwear made out of ocean plastics. So, it's just always pushing the boundaries now, using innovation and sustainability, and also at the same time being a cruelty-free brand. And that's what led me to then look at founding the SOS with Craig and Devesh, because, for me, I was using a supply chain and then I was promoting it and then I was buying it to produce it. So for me, it was about closing up that gap and being completely circular instead of linear. That's a very long answer to a very short question, but I probably answered all of your questions now. So
yeah, exactly. I think we can wrap it up. No, that just prompted 100 more. I'm curious, have you found attitudes have changed much? So when you first got into luxury fashion and were really a practically solo voice in the room saying we need to do this sustainably and we need to do this cruelty free, did you find that the reaction to those ideas was very different when you first started versus now? And what do you think has prompted some of the changes in attitude, if there have been any?
Well, yeah, luckily things have definitely progressed. I started a million years ago and I was definitely ridiculed. I was always the eco weirdo in the conversation and I was made fun of a lot. I was the first house to really not obviously do fur. It was one of the most sort of obvious things back then to not do, but really everyone still worked in fur. And I sent out an anti-fur video that I narrated for Peter very early on and to all of my peers, all of my fashion designers, because for me, it's not just the business side, it's also the creators that hold the key to this change for good. And I had a whole host of reactions. A lot got sent back to me unopened. There's a lot of resistance and I was mocked, I think, for a lot of it. So that on top of being a Nepo baby didn't particularly serve me very well at the beginning of my career. But I'm glad to say that, I think this is a conversation for the next generation of business people. This is obviously, the business of fashion is it's a huge industry. We're one of the most harmful to the planet, and one of the second most harmful to the planet in how we produce and how we source and manufacture, and not to even mention sort of, human welfare, when you're talking about animal agriculture and how you're getting these leathers and, furs and feathers. So I was definitely made fun of. And I think that, yes, things have shifted, luckily. But I do put that down to information. I'm a big believer in giving people information and then they can just make up their own minds if they just have that little piece that might shift their way of looking at how they consume. But I do think that obviously this is about safeguarding our planet, and the future generations obviously have a lot invested in that. So luckily it's a conversation that's now in my industry. There's a lot of greenwashing, unfortunately, but fighting on. It's getting better.
How do you think we combat greenwashing? Is that regulation? Is it that consumers need to demand more from brands? As a designer yourself, are you pushing your peers to be a little bit more transparent and authentic in their proclamations of sustainability? I mean, I think we all know it is, to your point, extremely rampant and something we need to address in order for credible brands to build trust with consumers.
I think it's all of the things you mentioned. I think that at the first, the most important thing, I was at the G7 and I've been at most of the COPs and Davos, which is less my thing. But I've been to so many of these summits now, and I really truly believe without policy and legislation change that it's an industry that's really unpoliced. I police myself. I set my own limitations on myself. And I think that I'm one of the rare creatures, doing that. But I do believe, so, that laws have to be set in place. I often say this, which people find shocking. For example, all of my non-leather goods, that I export into the United States currently could be taxed up to 30% more just because they're not leather, which must be a medieval legislation that was passed. I don't know why. Like maybe some of the people watching can help me out here. But, I've sat and I've talked to the leaders of the world, and they're gobsmacked when I give them that information. It's not only, you're not only not incentivized to run a business this way, but you're penalized. So I put that in my margin. That's not a way to run business. And I think the future business of fashion, whether it be designers or CEOs or CFOs or embroiderers or knitwear designers, we need to be incentivized, and the next generations of suppliers and manufacturers and designers and business leaders need to actually get a tax break if they want to work in this way. So I think that obviously is a big part of it. And consumers have to be responsible, and again, that's part of the information piece that I think is really critical to give, and not to preach. I'm not a big preacher. I think you need to just give people facts, and then in a way that they can digest. I mean, a lot of people don't know that glues in fashion are made of boiled down horses' hooves and animal bones. So, I say that lightly when I'm doing talks like this, and we obviously don't use that. We use an alternative glue. But I think when people know that, then they obviously don't want to mathematically be part of that. A part of that supply, and demand. And I also think human welfare is a massive conversation, because I think it's something that people can connect with. I obviously talk from the heart for animals, but I think that most people do understand when I say, look, if you're working at minimum wage, do you want to work in an abattoir, or do you want to clean up toilets in an airport? Like, I know what I would choose. So I think there's a lot to be done. And the greenwashing, it should be monitored for sure.
You mentioned COP, which actually reminded me of an anecdote from that you told me when we first met at COP many years ago. And it effectively boiled down to, when you first started the brand, you would go into stores and watch people look at the leather handbags, which weren't really leather, and just fall in love with them as a handbag without even knowing that they were more sustainable and were cruelty-free. And that's something that really resonates. As you know, at Collaborative Fund, we have this concept called the villain test, which effectively boils down to consumers want to do good. They want to buy products that are better for the planet, but they don't want to make sacrifices aesthetics or quality or performance. I'm curious, if that anecdote still rings true, if you still think about first catching customers by delighting them and then adding, all the other advantages as sort of a cherry on top, or if we could talk about that a little bit more. I always found that such an interesting origin story.
Yeah, I mean, I always used to love that. I've been doing this from day one, and before you could even explain to people why something wasn't made out of real leather, it was kind of a pointless conversation to start. So I would always love it when, J-Lo would be wearing a pair of my shoes and she would have no idea that they weren't leather. I always took delight out of that, because I think, look, at the end of the day, I'm a designer, and I think at the end of the day, you can't punish people through this conversation. You can't offer a piece of innovation, a mushroom mycelium bag that's grown in a lab and saving the planet and not using water and not using X, Y, and Z. But, if it's like rock and you can't use it, it's just pointless to even go through the process of manufacturing it and trying to sell it and PR it. So for me, the product is king. The desirability is key. I'm in the world of luxury fashion. You have to give a dream. You have to make people escape through what they wear and how they express themselves through that. So for me, it's critical that design is at the kind of forefront of the conversation. And I also believe very much that if, I design in quite a timeless way, I'm less seasonal. And I think that you should not really have to buy another camel coat if you have the best made camel coat. That, it may cost you more, because that's always a conversation that I struggle with personally, that my stuff isn't super cheap. It's not super expensive either, but it's definitely not fast fashion, which we know is buried every single second or burnt every single second and barely worn even 3 times before it's thrown away. So the design part is really critical. And I think that reuse and resale and pieces being an investment is really important part of the conversation. And I do delight in people not knowing all the time, but I do also struggle because, again, I want people to have that information and to learn through fashion. I think people are having those conversations in food, they're having those conversations in energy, they're having them in so many different ways when people are making choices to bring, sustainability into their home. And fashion is a big part of that conversation.
I imagine a lot of the participants on this call, or at least some of them, are thinking about starting a brand in sustainable materials or sustainable fashion. I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs dialed in, and they're likely facing this challenge of, when you're starting a company, all the inputs are really expensive if they're sustainable. There is still a green premium for smaller quantities, and to your point, very high taxes on alternatives to leather, for instance. And so they're likely facing this struggle of starting a company where the products are going to be much more expensive than incumbent brands, or less accessible. And I'm curious how you think about sort of the balance of accessibility, and particularly given the history of luxury fashion being about exclusivity and being about, keeping a very small customer base. Yeah, I'm curious what advice you would have for entrepreneurs coming up in this space if they want to make their products a little more accessible for a broader audience, but are struggling with the pricing.
That is obviously an issue. I mean, I struggle with that even with a lot of the innovation that I use. It's wonderful. I love it, but maybe we can't scale it up. Maybe the price point is not something that I can take to LVMH and say, hey, why don't you swap out all of those leather bags for a Miram, for example, which obviously you work with closely, and it's non-plastic. And those are conversations you need to have. This is an industry, and most industries, because we landed here for whatever reason, are dirty industries. And the only future of any industry, if we want to have a planet, if we want to survive on the planet, for a period of time, they have to be clean. And so you have to swap out dirty industry for clean industry. But yeah, there is a teething area for sure, and I think there's a balance between, the sort of ethics of why one does something, getting the support from investors, having a long-term belief that, you have to get through a period of uncomfort, to get through to the other side. Again, political support, financial support from governments, subsidies and things like that are critical. But I do think, and I think your point to this I didn't really answer your question about this being a business that is investable, and I think that it can only be the way. You shouldn't be doing this for any other reason than to have a great business. I mean, and I don't think there's any shame in that. I think you can have a clean business model and have a healthy balance sheet. Otherwise, you can't set an example. I mean, I work with the largest fashion group in the world, and Monsieur Arnaud, I'm his sustainable advisor. And, I think he sent out a very loud message to my industry when he wanted to be a minority, shareholder in my business. I think that was him showing that he believed in this. And I think you can't do this and not have a healthy business model. Otherwise, it's just not going to work for the economy. It's not something that's sustainable in itself.
I completely agree. We need more examples of successful businesses doing with better business models, so that more emerging designers and entrepreneurs come up and want to model that. So given that, have you seen your consumer base shift at all throughout the years? Has the demographic of your prototypical customer changed at all?
I mean, yeah, it changes all the time, but it's a funny one. I have a lot of animal lovers that, come to me, a lot of people that know what I do and I'm their go-to. I remember I was doing a public appearance many, many years ago, and a woman came up to me. She said, "Oh, I just love Stella McCartney, because what you do for me as a consumer that loves fashion, but cares about the environment, cares about animals, and cares about, trying to buy with a conscience. What you do and what you deliver for me as a customer is I don't have to think about it. I go into a store and you've already done all the thinking for me." And that really hit me hard. I was like, that's a really big privilege, and I don't take that lightly. So I have a lot of customers like that. And then I have a huge amount of people that don't know anything. They've just found the brand, or they've seen, something, and they're drawn to it, and they still have no idea that it's all, cruelty free and plant based, and that's kind of cool. I think we have a mix.
All right. Well, shifting gears a little bit. What do you think, and looking forward, what do you think are the most promising and exciting emerging technologies that you're thinking about incorporating into Stella McCartney, or recommending for LVMH, or just even outside of fashion? What do you think are the areas that we should all be really paying attention to in this space?
I think it really depends. Our industry is so vast. We work with, our sourcing in animal agriculture, in just, in just plant-based agriculture. We have so many touch points in fashion. So then we go into manufacturing, we go into mills, we go into, so many different areas. We have architecture, we have stores, we have retail, we have packaging, we have, there's just so much. So really, this is an industry that has so many different touch points that are so exciting. When we work with loads of them in the fund, and that I love getting to meet these young, incredible innovators. And I had a great we had Keel Labs, which, as you know, Sophie, is an amazing innovation using seaweed, transferring it into knitwear. So I exclusively put them on my runway. And I just use them again now, and it's getting to a place where we can scale it up. It has a great price point, and we can actually roll it out. So they're a great example of female founded innovation. And again, I already mentioned, Miram, which I'm a huge fan of, NFW, which is basically a plastic-free natural alternative to leather. We're doing wonderful things with them. And I think, again, coming to your point, because of the area of the industry that I play in, and my partners, everything goes through the same testing that a leather bag would go through. So all of these materials have to come up to scratch. They have to have wearability, they have to have durability. And so we're working in amazing things. And then we have, I have lists and lists of them in front of me, but we have Protein Evolution, which is a really brilliant recycling program that I've worked with as well, looking at breaking down using enzymes and proteins and things. So we have, there's so many great innovations. I've just done a project with the waste of the wine industry. I'm looking at grape skins. I've done a whole host of leather alternatives there that I just put on the runway. We're doing the same with apple waste. I've got so much. We have sequins that are being grown in labs, because sequins are PVC. They're normally petroleum based. God, I use this amazing knitwear using plastic bottles. There's just, I literally, if I took you outside of this room, you would have a field on with the amount of things.
It's amazing. It's almost overwhelming in that there's so many aspects of our supply chains, basically every aspect of our supply chains, that need to be reimagined away from fossil fuels. Everything, to your point, from sequins, which I'm sure most people wouldn't even occur to them to think of that as a non-sustainable, fashion material. But every single vector in this space.
It is. It's every single touch point. We were the first people to use a sustainable viscose, for example. You guys, the majority of Americans is rayon, because I'm half American. I'm bilingual when it comes to this. But I'm sure if I asked everyone watching what they think rayon is made out of, I don't know if anyone would get it right. Normally, when I have this conversation in a room of hundreds of fashion people, they have no idea, and yet it's what they use is the majority of their fabric sourcing. So rayon is made of wood pulp, and the industry cuts down over 150 million trees every year for rayon. And what we did at Stella McCartney, with no incentives, no schemes, and out of the business, we had to invest time and money. We sourced a sustainable forest in Sweden, and we swapped out all of our viscose for sustainable, and we replanted all the trees. Simple, easy. And that then is now part of the industry. We brought that into the group, and now we're lucky if we get it now. It's so simple. But
We
Yeah.
should make a quick plug for Ruby Labs, which is also an SOS investment, and a company that is making lab grown alternative to viscose. So
Great. Bring it on. I'm all for lab grown. I mean, I've had a lot of great experiences, and then, I'm still waiting. If somebody can grow me some leather and some meat in a lab, that's when the world will truly be livable for a long time.
couldn't agree more. I think a lot of these companies are facing big bottlenecks to scaling up the technologies. They're there, they work. It's just figuring out a way that we can get the economics to pencil out on large enough scales to make sense for big brands.
I also think it's, swapping it out. Obviously I'm fully aware that this is entrenched in the industry that you're talking about. It's like, and people are afraid to change, and they feel like if they lose real leather for an alternative, they're, oh my God, what's going to happen to the leather industry? I always say, look, when do morals come into this conversation? I think that there's been plenty of industries in the past that were very lucrative for a lot of people, but they didn't have morals at the core of them. And the law came into play, and they said, you know what, you're not allowed to do that anymore. It's not right. So I think there are moments where we have to also hope that happens too.
Couldn't agree more. We're going to switch to audience Q&A in a minute, but I had one more question, which actually is very similar to one of the audience's questions. I hope I'm saying your name right, Magali Mendez, which is effectively sort of your advice for, again, a lot of the entrepreneurs or would be designers on this call who, in order to scale up and sort of satisfy that bottleneck issue we have around getting from a smaller brand to real scale, a lot of these folks are going to have to partner or collaborate with brands like yourselves. So folks who they can work with, who have a little bit more scale already. What's your advice to them for accessing teams like yours and others, and how should they think about collaborating with major fashion brands?
It's a good question. Well, look, we're here. We are definitely the one that everyone comes to. So we get
Very true.
We're the ones that people are always, we're always seeing things early on, because I think people know that that's kind of, how we work here. But just literally call everyone, get in contact with their sustainable department. They should, if they've got any, if they're worth working with, they should have a sustainable department, whether it's one person part-time or 20 people, full-time. Get in touch, be pushy, be annoying, and show them your product. Give them samples, be ready to do a lot of sampling, get over, knock on doors, just go door to door, go to the fairs, go to the sample, to the fairs where you can buy fabrics or you can get products, or, be aware of your industry, learn up and look at your competitors, partner with your competitors. I'm all for that. All I want is to not be the only person having this conversation in my industry. I'm like, God, when is somebody going to partner with me? I'm all for that. I think that's healthy, especially if you're doing it for the right reasons. If you really want true change, I think everyone wants to come into the conversation. It's not about being competitive. It's about working together. And I think, I think trying to see what government grants there are, what schemes there are, and looking at investment funds like SOS to try and, maybe looking at colleges, looking at just getting information and fighting. Just get ready to fight.
Love that. Okay, that's perfect segue to transition to some of these audience questions, of which we have a ton. So let me just go maybe in order. Darko Mandic asked, so what are some of the less, I know, wonderful name.
So good for Halloween.
Exactly. He's curious, what can the world of luxury products and fashion teach us about general trends in consumer expectations for products outside of fashion? So presumably things like food, for instance, or furniture, cars, just, yeah, how do you think about fashion?
I always think that the fashion industry is the most old-fashioned industry out of all of the ones you've just mentioned. So I wouldn't necessarily turn to us. I think that we're turning more to those industries. I feel like because of the lead times in our industry, we're kind of a little further behind. I'm always trying to push things along. I mean, all of those that you mentioned have a long lead time, but yeah, I mean, it might be able to tell you what color of something you might. I honestly, genuinely, I'm always complaining that our industry is really, really far behind and not as forward thinking as it could be. So, and I think also this idea of what is luxury. You know, for me, luxury is having a healthy planet to live on and clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and having a quality of living. So I think that luxury is open for your own, you know, way of looking at it.
Great. All right. Next one is from Ben Hilborn, who asks, how do you entice users towards behavioral changes?
How I personally do it, I personally try to gently nudge people into a way of looking at life through a different lens. And that is normally through, I mean, if you look at my social media, if you look at my Instagram or TikTok, I'm very much about giving an insight into how I work, making little, you know, innovation films, a lot of which you can look at now. I've just done a whole show in Paris about birds and about the feather industry. About 9 billion birds are killed every year just for a you know, duck down puffer jacket or a feather trim on an evening gown. And it's a dark industry, like it's not pretty. I don't think any of us want to go and see how those beautiful peacock feathers got plucked and end up on a, you know, ball gown. So I'm more about information. I'm more about giving, and I'm not that kind of intense in how I describe it normally. And normally I'm like, oh, did you know? And maybe you want to look at this next time you think of buying a puffer jacket. So I'm more information led. I gently nudge people into maybe a different way of consuming via giving them information.
Do you think
And
that
I just try and make people feel guilty all the time about feeling. No, yeah, I'm going. I don't. I think information's critical. I think, you know, learning is one of the most incredible privileges, right? And they say you learn something new every day, and I believe you do.
do you often encounter folks who don't believe in or care about climate change or sustainability? Do you try to bring them over to our side, or do you let it be? You think it's
You still meet, you rarely meet, you don't meet people that would admit that they don't believe that it's happening. I mean, other than some of your candidates for
I
your
was gonna say
your election coming up. But I definitely, I've spent my entire life and career being met with either defensiveness or anger or, you know, a level of aggression and sort of, you know, people being adamant that my way of looking at the world is not the right way. I mean, look, I'm a big believer that it's not an emotional conversation. It's, if you're dealing with facts, it's not emotional. So, and I deal with facts. That's how I come at it. But I do understand that it's a hard pill to swallow and it's a scary pill. So I try not to use fear as a tool to help people change the way they consume. I honestly believe if people knew how a leather bag was made, they would choose my non-leather bag that I believe looks better.
yeah,
You know?
exactly. As a key component as well.
I just launched. I hope everyone looks at my stuff because actually, it's like I was looking at stuff yesterday with a friend of mine who's an environmentalist, and I was just going through my Instagram, and I was like, oh, I did this project with equine therapy, and oh, I did this project about, you know, I mean, there's just so much on there, and I think it's great to have a look and see what you learn and reach out. You know, we're here as a platform of information too. I believe that, you know, we want to share our findings with the industry.
Now, I will confirm, I've seen firsthand how great Stella's team is at working with emerging companies and entrepreneurs, and even from the very early stages when they're too early to fit into Stella's supply chain, they're great partners. Corica Juan Pedro had a great question, which again kind of aligns with another question I had for you around sort of how optimistic you're feeling. Corica asks, do you think the evolution of materials for fashion could reach a point of no pollution before 2050? I'm curious to hear your answer to that, but also just broadly how you're feeling about merch. Yes, great.
It's funny. I'm like, is it? I'm a like. Is that? It's funny. I happen to have my order. Is it half glass full or half glass empty? You tell me. I definitely think it's a half glass full. Even if I drink it to where it might be considered a half glass empty, I'm a half glass full type. So I'm just yeah. If where there's a will, there's a way. I do believe where there's a will, there's a way.
That's great. Love a little dose of optimism in the morning.
I mean, look, I hate it when I lose hope. I've got kids and I don't enjoy that for them. So I'm going to just keep doing everything I can. I truly believe, it's funny, like your first question, why did I start this? And it's because I am creative and I love fashion. And I grew up with parents that were on stage and I would look at their wardrobe and I'd be like, oh, this is kind of really gender fluid. And I was fascinated by what it, on a social level, on an emotional level, what it delivered. And that's what inspired me, as well as just, how things look and felt when you wore them, how they made you feel. That was a huge part of why I do what I do. It still is. But, more and more I'm like, God, I'm very blessed that I have an outlet to try and give people information. Now I'm older and I have such a kind of hardcore belief system that this is my purpose and it's important. I use the fashion industry and my job here to really try and make change.
Love that. Okay, next question is from Sabrina Zaini. Lots of really great names on these questions so far. Who asks about sort of branding within deep tech and how to think about making really deeply technical, complicated technologies sort of accessible and to develop a brand that is relatable. I think, as you know, a lot of those companies you mentioned, Miram and Keel and Ruby, these are really, really complicated technologies and processes. Yeah. How do you advise entrepreneurs to kind of create a brand that's relatable in those businesses?
Relatable in product or relatable in packaging I mean, that's broad. I think I find, and I always say, like, when I talk about the innovation that we use here at Stella, I'm like, that's where this shit gets sexy. Like, I'm like, this is, I can give you a sexy dress. I can deliver on sexy and design, but like for me, how we source and the innovation piece, I'm like, that's, excuse my language, that shit is sexy to me. So I think, deep innovation, it blows my brains. I don't get it. I'm sure many of the people on this call wouldn't know how to make a dress if they had a gun to their head. So I think it's when those two collide and when we complement each other as industries and when we sort of that interactive moment. But I think making things look attractive is important. Getting your decks. I mean, I do find I'm a visual person. When I see a deck from an innovation company, I'm like, oh my God, please use a better picture. Please have a better font. Please, you're a hot mess. What is that brand called? That is like the worst name in the world. So, bring some people around that are a bit more creative or have that kind of, if you're not that way inclined but you're a scientist, and I think those two, it's nice. I think we can all work together. I think that's when you get to a success and a sweet spot.
I think that's great advice. Maybe boils down to lean into the complexity of the really sexy, crazy, deep technology aspects of your business. But at Collaborative, we definitely have a mantra that brand always matters, even if you're not facing a consumer, thinking about things like your name and your brand and
everything's
a nice looking deck.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm just sitting here thinking, Sophie, one thing we should give to anyone, there's a lot of those questions. We should just create a template for people to just drop their things into. Like, I think easy. It doesn't need to be hard. I'll try and supply a sexy template, and you guys can just drop your businesses into it.
Exactly. Make it as simple as possible for everyone. That's great. All right, we're coming up on time quickly, and we'll get through a few more of these. Rashmi Prabhu asks, how would fashion designers, if ever, bring pre-owned apparel back into current trend to help remove stigma around using pre-owned apparel for the larger population? I think this is a great question, and I'm just generally curious about your thoughts on pre-owned.
I'm a big fan. I've always done. I mean, since I was 10, I was going to fair. I mean, I was just looking at my new collection. It's just all vintage. It's all like secondhand. It's all thrift stores. But I think if you've got a sense of style and you're kind of creative, you can do that. I think people that are more afraid and don't necessarily feel the confidence in how to style themselves, that they won't necessarily lean into that. Today, more than ever, though, it's allowed and it's encouraged. And, you have great business models looking at the $500 billion worth of waste that we generate every year. It's a business opportunity. Waste is like, if you can figure out how to use the waste. And I'm a big fan of repurposing, reselling. I think that it's one of the ways I justifies a slightly a higher price point than fast fashion, is because you can resell and it's an investment. And I truly believe that. And you've got great examples of business models that are doing that. I do think, I mean, I've got my collection outside now. I'm using all waste materials. I'm using all stock. I'm like, guys, we're not going to buy any material this year. Like this season, I'm just going to use stock from my suppliers. I'm like, what have you got? What's a great old tailoring that's just kind of basic? How much stock do you have? Can I use it for production? I just don't even want to be part of making anything this season. So I'm kind of going a little too far the other way. But I think that there's great opportunity in vintage, in old. I think if somebody can crack that, then you have a great business opportunity, and people are doing it.
Couldn't agree more. All right, we'll move over to Amanda Turner's question. She asks, where do you see the future of innovative materials going, and what will be the most impactful solution to achieving a positive impact? I'm very curious about this one too. If we could just pick one thing to fix tomorrow, you could just snap your fingers and one material in our global supply chains was fixed, what would it be?
Growing leather or growing meat. I mean, if you're just going to fashion, that, but if you want my answer as a citizen of planet Earth, growing meat in labs. Because it is killing our planet and it's cutting down our rainforests and it's deeply cruel. It's horrible on every level. So if that could happen, that would be my wish.
I love hearing that. I think a lot of people on the call probably know that this is an area that's been hit really hard by sort of the capital squeeze of the last few years. There's a lot fewer dollars going into alternative leathers and alternative meats, but when we look decades out, it feels like an inevitability, and I'm optimistic that somebody is going to crack this nut. It's going to happen in our lifetimes, and we need more people working on this.
And I think something to be very realistic about is, the meat bodies, the leather bodies, these are massive, incredibly well-funded, movements. And I remember when I was really young and I was talking about anti-fur, and I used to get threading leathers from the fur bodies. These are hugely well-funded. There's groups of people around the world and businesses that support funding, to go against actively the kind of planet's welfare. So, you have to be realistic. And the minute there's a disaster, this all gets pushed down to the bottom of the list. We know that. So, but again, it's a little less full, but it's still half full.
Always full, even when it's empty. Great. Elena Lisman has a question around that I think harkens back to the villain test and that anecdote I shared earlier that you had shared with me at COP. She has wondering about sustainability versus durability when it comes to handbags. You can make a natural one with mirum and cotton threads, but without reinforcements, which are often synthetics, it might not last and can rip. What's your view there?
Synthetics, by what do you mean in synthetics? That's a huge conversation. That's actually my 30% tax is synthetics. And for me, it's a very broadly used term. Synthetics are fine. They can be woven. As long as they don't have tons of chemicals and tons of plastic. As synthetic is anything. Anything's a synthetic, I think. As long as it's not an animal product. So yes, you do need to back a lot of them. You don't need to back all of them now. We don't back some. We really don't back. You need to bond things, but again, we don't use the animal glues and we don't use toxic glues. I think it's, we've done all the work for you, essentially. Just call me. I've got everything. It's like my whole solve this problem for the industry. you need to find the right materials. And yeah, you have to avoid the nasty synthetics for sure. I mean, I was just showing this friend of mine around again earlier. Then I was looking at my new fabric wall, and I have faux furs, and a lot of, fur is incredibly damaging to the animals and to the planet, as we know. But fake fur it's still 70% more sustainable than real fur, and you're not killing animals. But there is an element to a lot of the fake furs now with the longer threads. They can have plastics, they can, so they can be not great. So we don't even use the fake furs here at Stella. We just use, yarns that are completely natural. It means we have a lot less offered to us on a creative level. We don't have these really long furs. We don't have like a lot of different textures. But I think in a way you have to sacrifice something to be a better business model for tomorrow, cleaner. And I don't mind the sacrifice, because for me, it forces me to be more creative when I have less available to me. I didn't really answer your question. I'm sorry, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I think we all got I think we have time for one or two more. So I'm going to jump to Sydney Badger. Hi, Sydney. I know Sydney. How do you collaborate with manufacturers to reduce emissions and improve supply chain operations? Seems like a critical aspect to scale impact.
We work a lot on like R&Ds with different factories that we work with. I also do have a long-standing collaboration with Adidas, so we challenge our factories all the time. We've done programs in the past where we will set a kind of benchmark of, this, you can only use this amount of water, you can't use this amount of electricity, and we'll put in limitations on a factory, and we'll do a test to see if they can actually reduce on their energy use and things like that. And they always 100% of the time they fulfill the challenge, and they stick with it because they realize they save money. So we do that. We always put challenges on our suppliers. We're known for that in the industry. And also, because we don't use feathers, we'll look at our suppliers that will use a more conventional padding, for example, and we'll challenge them. We'll give them something that we found. There's an amazing British innovation that's so beautiful. It's using bulrushes. I don't know what you call them, but I think they're called bulrushes. When the seeds explode, it's like this, just like the most lightweight wadding. And we take those to the conventional suppliers and we ask them to trial them. So it's really a collaborative way of working, she says. That should be your last question. I said the word.
That's a perfect point to end this on, I think, and maybe turn it back over to the folks at SOSV to wrap us up. But that was really great. Thank you so much, Stella. Thank you so much to the audience.
Yeah.
So many great questions. Yeah, they were.
Yeah. Let's do it again and make more questions. I love it. How many people are in on this?
We've had a few hundred. They've been in and out a little bit, but yeah.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for having me, guys, and good luck to everyone watching. Like, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Thank you so much. It was very, very inspiring session on learning about your journey. I hopefully inspired many other technologists and fashion designers and also larger brands to use more sustainable materials and see that there are alternatives that can work, and that you can create great products without necessarily a premium while being kind to the planet.